The garage sold on a frozen Tuesday morning in January. One bay, cracked concrete floor, a roof that leaked in 2 places, and a roll-up door that required a specific lifting technique nobody had written down anywhere. Giselle Harmon signed a contract with a smirk she did not bother to hide. $1,000. Cash. The man across from her said nothing. He took the key, folded the contract once, and walked out into the gray winter air. Giselle turned to her assistant and laughed. 6 months later, she stopped laughing. Eli Harper's apartment on Delancey Street was the kind of place that had been arranged by someone who understood the difference between empty and simple. The walls held nothing except one thing, a hand-drawn map made in crayon of a neighborhood that did not quite exist yet. Roads labeled in unsteady 8-year-old handwriting. Buildings drawn with the particular confidence of someone who had never been told that buildings were complicated. In the bottom right corner, in purple crayon, 2 words. Eli's place. Wren had made it the week they moved in. She had presented it to him rolled up with a rubber band, the way important documents are presented, and told him it was his business plan. He had framed it the same day. Wren was 8 years old and possessed of a seriousness that people who did not know her often mistook for shyness. She was not shy. She was watching. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's habit of arriving at conclusions before other people had finished asking the question. She kept a small red metal toolbox under her bed that she called the kit. Inside were things she had decided were important: a measuring tape, 3 different colored pens, a folded piece of paper with a list of things she wanted to build one day, and a photograph of her grandfather standing outside a garage somewhere in Ohio. She had never met him. He had died before she was born. But Eli had told her enough stories that she felt she had. That morning she was at the kitchen table with the kit open beside her breakfast, reorganizing its contents with the focused efficiency of someone preparing for something significant. "Are we going to the garage today?" she asked. Eli set her orange juice down beside the kit and considered the word "we" the way he considered most things Wren said, carefully, because she chose words with more precision than people gave her credit for. "After school," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and returned a measuring tape to its designated position. "It smelled like something last time," she said. "Motor oil and old wood," Eli said. She thought about this. "I like that smell," she decided. He tied her shoes at the door. The double knot was the same every morning, firm enough to last a day, not tight enough to cut circulation. He had once, in a different life, run tolerance and calculations on industrial fasteners for a living. The knot received the same attention. He watched her go. Then he picked up the garage key, a single key on a plain ring, scratched and slightly bent, and turned it once in his hand. $1,000. He put it in his jacket pocket and walked out into the January cold. The garage at 14 Fenwick Street was exactly what Giselle Harmon had called it. A pile of junk. One bay, as advertised. Approximately 800 square feet of cracked concrete floor that sloped slightly toward the back left corner where a drain had stopped working sometime during the previous decade. 2 narrow windows facing the alley, both painted over. A workbench along the south wall that had been bolted to the studs by someone who understood bolts and had left everything else to chance. The neighborhood around it was the kind of neighborhood that urban developers described in presentations as transitional, which was a word that meant it had not yet been noticed by people with serious money, and which Eli, who had spent 7 years studying exactly this kind of neighborhood for exactly this kind of moment, understood differently. He stood in the center of the garage on the first morning and turned slowly. He was not looking at what was there. He was looking at what was possible. Fenwick Street sat at the intersection of 3 things that Eli had spent 8 months identifying before he ever spoke to Giselle Harmon's real estate firm. A residential area growing faster than its infrastructure. A commercial corridor 2 blocks east that had underperformed for 6 years because it lacked an anchor. And a zoning classification that had not been updated since 1987, which meant that someone who understood what the classification permitted could build something that the neighborhood did not yet know it needed. Eli understood what it permitted. He took out a small notebook and began to write. Giselle Harmon had built Harmon Capital Group from a regional real estate firm into a $400 million operation over 11 years, and she had done it with a combination of financial intelligence and an instinct for dismissal that had served her well in a business that rewarded speed over sentiment. She did not waste time on things that did not serve her immediate strategy. The Fenwick Street garage had appeared in a portfolio review as a liability. A single commercial property in a transitional neighborhood, sitting idle, generating nothing, attached to a lease that had expired and a tenant who had not renewed. Her acquisitions director had flagged it 3 times. Giselle had looked at it once on a site map and made her decision in under 4 minutes. Clear it. Sell it. Move on. The buyer had come through a broker, a man named Eli Harper. No company name on the paperwork. A personal check for the asking price, which Giselle's director had set at $5,000 and which Eli had countered at $1,000 in a single email that contained 2 sentences and no pleasantries. Giselle had accepted it because the alternative was continuing to pay property tax on a building she had described to 3 separate colleagues as not worth the cost of demolition. She had met him once. At the signing, he wore a worn canvas jacket. He carried a notebook. He did not make small talk. She had said something to her assistant afterward, something that made the whole room laugh, and had not thought about Eli Harper or 14, Fenwick Street again, until the morning her acquisitions director placed a regional business publication on her desk and said nothing. The cover of the publication showed a building. Not a large building, not glass and steel. A converted single-bay garage on a street she recognized, expanded and restored, and surrounded by 6 months of construction that had changed everything around it. The headline read, Eli Harper and the Fenwick Street Revival. How one acquisition became a $4.2 million commercial development. Giselle stared at the cover for a long time. Then she turned to page 1. What she read there was not just the story of a garage. It was the story of everything she had missed and exactly how she had missed it. Eli had not moved quickly. He had moved correctly. The first 30 days at Fenwick Street were spent on nothing but assessment. He brought Wren on Saturdays, gave her the kit, and let her measure things while he walked the perimeter of the property and the 4 surrounding blocks with the methodical attention of a man conducting an audit of something valuable that other people had forgotten to look at. He knocked on doors, not with business cards or proposals, with questions. He asked the woman who ran the alteration shop on the corner how long she had been there and what she wished the neighborhood had. He asked the retired man, 3 doors down, what had been on the Fenwick lot before the garage. He asked the young couple at the end of the block where they drove to get groceries and how far that was. He wrote everything in the notebook. By day 31, he had a picture that no site map or portfolio review had ever assembled, because it required talking to the people who actually lived inside it. What Fenwick Street needed was not a development. It was not a retail corridor or a mixed-use concept from an architecture firm that had never been to the neighborhood. It needed a hub, a single, well-designed, multi-purpose commercial space that served the specific needs of the specific people already there. Affordable workspace for the 4 independent tradespeople within 2 blocks who were operating out of vehicles because they had nowhere else. A small retail front that could rotate between local vendors. A covered outdoor space for the Saturday market that currently had nowhere permanent to go. Eli had designed exactly this kind of space before, not as a developer, as an architect. He had spent 9 years at a firm in Chicago before his wife's illness, before the medical bills, before the decision to sell everything that could be sold and return to a city where Wren could grow up near people who knew her name. He had designed 12 commercial developments across 4 states. 3 of them had won regional architecture awards. One had been featured in a national publication that Giselle Harmon's acquisitions director had once cited in a presentation about urban renewal strategy. The firm that built it was listed on the cover. Eli's name was in the credits on page 43. Nobody at Harmon Capital had looked at page 43. He filed the building permits himself. He contracted the structural work to a 2-man outfit on the east side that he had found through the retired man 3 doors down. He did the design and project management himself. In the evenings, at the kitchen table beside Wren's homework, the Crayon map watching from the wall. The hub opened on a Thursday morning in July. By the following Saturday, every workstation was occupied. The Saturday market had moved in permanently. A local bakery had taken the retail front on a 6-month trial. 3 journalists had come through. 2 investors had left business cards. Eli had put both cards in the notebook and called neither of them. He did not need investors. He needed the second property, the vacant lot adjacent to the garage that the city had been trying to offload for 2 years at a price nobody had met. He met on a Tuesday. The letter from Harmon Capital arrived on a Wednesday. It was a professional letter. Precise language, correct formatting, an offer figure that Giselle's team had clearly spent time on. Significant enough to be serious, conservative enough to leave room to negotiate upward. Eli read it at the kitchen table. Wren was doing homework beside him. She looked at the letterhead, the gold embossed H of Harmon Capital, and then at her father's face. "Is that the lady who sold you the garage?" she asked. Eli looked at her. "What do you know about that?" he said. Wren returned to her homework. "You told me," she said simply. "You said someone sold you something they didn't look at properly." Eli folded the letter. "Yes," he said. "That's her." Wren was quiet for a moment. "What does she want?" "To buy it back," Eli said. Wren considered this with the deliberate seriousness she brought to most questions. "Are you going to?" she asked. Eli looked at the crayon map on the wall. "Eli's place." "No," he said. Wren nodded, as though this was the only reasonable answer. "Good," she said, and went back to her homework. Eli accepted the meeting. Not because he was reconsidering. He had decided at the kitchen table. He accepted it because Giselle Harmon had built something real over 11 years, and she deserved to hear the answer directly, in person, with the same clarity she had brought to her own decisions. The Harmon Capital boardroom was everything Fenwick Street was not. Glass, steel, a view of the city that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. 12 people around the table. Giselle at the head. She presented the offer with the precision Eli had expected. Revised upward from the letter. Structured well. A genuine attempt. When she finished, the room was quiet. Eli opened his notebook to a page near the back. Not a read from it. Just to place it on the table. A single gesture that said everything about how he had arrived at this moment. Then he looked at Giselle directly. "You sold me that garage for $1,000, he said. "Not because it wasn't worth more. Because you didn't look at it." Giselle held his gaze. "I know," she said, quietly, without deflection. "The people on Fenwick Street looked at it every day for years," Eli said. "They're the reason it became what it became. Not me." He paused. "I'm not selling it. Because it's not mine to sell." The room was very still. "But," Eli said, and he turned to a different page in the notebook, "I have 3 other sites. Same zoning classification. Same neighborhood profile. Same opportunity." He slid the notebook across the table toward her. "If you want to stop missing things, I'll show you how to look." Giselle Harmon studied the notebook for a long time. Then she looked up at Eli across the boardroom table, the man in the canvas jacket who had come to her office with a personal check and 2 sentences and no pleasantries. And she said something that her board had never heard her say in 11 years of meetings. "Tell me more." Eli Harper did not become wealthy because he found a cheap garage. He became wealthy because he looked at something everyone else had decided wasn't worth looking at, and he looked at it properly. The crayon map is still on the wall at Delancey Street. Wren drew a new one recently, bigger, more streets, more buildings. She presented it the same way, rolled up with a rubber band. In the bottom right corner, in purple crayon, the same 2 words. Eli's place. Some things don't need to be updated. Subscribe. Because every week we tell the stories of the people who saw what everyone else walked past.